Hi, my name is Michele Titolo. As John mentioned, I am CTO of Women Who Code. We're a global grassroots nonprofit for empowering women to engage in technology careers. And I'm also a core team member of CocoaPods, which is the Objective-C library dependency manager, like Ruby Gems, NPM, Maven, Gradle, etc. But why am I here? I'm here because I have made a lot of apps. I've been developing iOS apps for over 4 years. The platform's only been around for about six and a half. So I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of changes, and I'm here to share some of the things that I've learned, specifically doing consulting for the past 3 years. So over a dozen apps I've released, and most of those have been first-time apps for companies. So I have a lot to share. So normally, this is what you hear. We need an app. And competitors are like, yes, we need an app. It's 2013, 2014, mobile is big. Everyone in this room is probably carrying a computer in their pocket right now. So these devices are here, they're not going away. But what companies really need help with is, where do we start? There's a lot going on in the mobile ecosystem right now. There's different operating systems, different tools, and people just get kind of overwhelmed. They're like, we want to make this app, but do we need Objective-C? Do we need like 5 Objective-C developers? Do we need Android developers? Like, what other stuff do we need? And I'm going to tell all of that. But first, we're going to talk about product, because mobile products are different than web products. It might be the same company, it might be the same data that the user is interacting with, but it's a different experience. So MVPs on mobile are really important, because if you're building your app for the first time, chances are you don't have the resources of Facebook, who took 3 years to build paper. Chances are you don't want to do that. You want to be able to go through and have your app in the ecosystem sooner rather than later. But MVP doesn't really work on mobile, because users are really smart and users are picky. So you need MDP, or minimum delightful product. It's a bit more work than an MVP. There's a bit more polish. But inherently, this means that you're enabling your users to be successful. Because when they're on the go, when they're stuck at a muni station, they have 5 minutes, they want to be able to check your app and see the one thing that they want to check. They don't want to have to go through and tap 5 places and then wait for a page to load. That's not what happens. They want to be able to do what they want and be successful. So features are usually a big question when you're making your first mobile app. And the biggest question is, do we have feature parity? The answer to that is both yes and no. Users like being able to do the same thing on an app that they would on a website. I know I'm personally frustrated when I'm using an app and I can't update my account settings or change my email or something really silly. But at the same time, you don't want to do too much. And then you release an app, a year, 2 years down the line, and your product's evolved and mobile's way behind. So timeline is also a thing that you have to worry about, as I just mentioned, because it's a new type of software. And apps are software. This has been changing over the past couple of years, but I remember when I first started doing development, and I think it was the second project I worked on, the client was like, oh, so you can build this in 3 weeks, right? And you looked at it and there's maybe 15, 20 screens, there's a lot of API calls, there's a lot of UI work to be done, and you're just like, I don't think you understand what you're building. This is an entire new piece of software that you have to be able to support. So you have to be prepared for that. And this brings me into the development aspect of apps. The biggest question when a company's like, we want to build an app, is, do we hire people in-house or do we hire a third party? I've had experience as that third party, but there's a lot to be said for doing both. The biggest key that people kind of don't realize about mobile engineers is that we're all product engineers. We are the ones that work with the platform every day. We know the device capabilities. I know Android engineers who just know what phones are going to be a problem when they go to test, just because they've done it so many times. And this meta information about the ecosystem and the development process is really, really useful to have. So Engineers are the subject matter experts, and including mobile engineers in your development process will make things go much smoother. They'll be able to tell you if a design will take a day to implement or 3 weeks to implement. Because trust me, sometimes it will take 3 weeks to implement, especially when you're dealing with some of the restrictions on Apple's platform. But this also gives them product ownership. And any project manager, any technical person will be able to tell you that product ownership leads to better results. So engineers, mobile engineers who are included in the process of developing an app, who are included in decision making in terms of designs, in terms of user flows, in terms of all of those really important decisions, they'll make much, much better apps. And this is what everybody wants. Another thing to note is that apps aren't one-offs. I've seen this time and time again. A company will hire a third party, a contractor, or an agency to build an app. They build the app, they release it, it's great, all is good. They do like maybe 1 or 2 releases, and then it basically stops getting updated. And mobile's moving really fast. I mean, WWDC is coming up with likely iOS 8, we don't really know, but even last year when iOS 7 was announced, all the developers were like, we have to update all of our apps to support this. That's a lot of work. And now people know, they can tell when your app hasn't been touched in 6 months, a year. Starbucks was getting a lot of flack for that for a while because they only launched their iOS 7 redesign, I think, last month. Users notice, and users like updated apps. And you also don't want your app to die because then you're not getting users and you're not making money, obviously. So some quick pros and cons. If you want to go in-house with your app development, hiring is hard. I don't have to tell anybody that. We're in the tech industry. In San Francisco, it's a bit better, simply because there's more developers here. But if you're doing your first iteration of your app, you want to make sure that you have people who have done that before and who want to be a part of the entire process. You don't want someone to just sit there and like get a set of designs and code the designs and not tell you that, oh, this thing's gonna take an extra 3 days, instead of doing this really quick thing that could be like an hour. There's a really steep learning curve in House because it is very different from web. I've worked with a lot of designers who come to mobile after doing web for many years, and I can't tell you how many times I've had to like futz with just text because they want bold, which you can do now, but like 2 years ago, you couldn't actually have one label that had bold text and not bold text. That was really hard. Yeah, it was not fun. So there's a steep learning curve in terms of development, in terms of management, and in terms of expectations. So having someone really experienced will definitely help do that better. But in-house, your engineers are invested. They're a part of the whole product development process, and they know your product. You know, it's not like someone's coming in with no domain knowledge. They don't know what sections of your site are only available to premium users. They don't know about the power users who will, you know, really complain if they don't have this one feature. So they'll do better work. As I've already said, engineers, we like being invested. We like being able to take part in the things that we build. And you also get really tight feedback loops. As someone who's worked as an agency developer for many years now, being able to tap someone on the shoulder when you have a really quick question, just like, oh, you have this over here, but on this page it's like, and it's blue, and on this page it's over here and it's red, and just being able to have those really quick conversations will make things a lot better. It will make your entire process be a lot smoother, and it will result in a better product. Third parties. Much shorter timelines. When I was doing agency work, for most apps, we'd estimate between 4 and 6 months of development time. And you had 2 developers, you had a product manager and a designer, as well as all of the other resources that the agency had to give, because that was their job. Their job was to be the subject matter experts. So you also had a really experienced team that could really, really help guide you in the right direction. But when you have someone else making your app, it's easy to get forgotten, just because there's no one in-house that is as invested as the people who are making it. So if no one in-house if you only have like one project manager who's project managing the app, and the VP of tech or engineering doesn't really know that much about it, and your creative director doesn't really know that much about it, it's going to be a bit harder for people to continue working on it after that agency contract is over. And so they're not invested. So you kind of want to make sure that you have a good relationship. Not all agencies, not all contractors are the same, but the majority of stories that I hear are that companies do have trouble like supporting their apps after they're made. The platform question. This one has been a lot in the news lately, as there was an article that came out a couple days ago that was like the myth of Android first or something. I'm not going to say anything nearly that controversial, I assure you. I am going to say a little bit about cross-platform apps, specifically HTML5, web apps, PhoneGap, Apache Cordova, whatever you want to call those things. And I'm a native iOS developer. I've only ever developed native iOS apps. And I'm here to tell you that users are smart. They can tell when your app is not native. They can, especially in iOS 7. If you're ever in an app in iOS 7 and you're using the keyboard and there's the keyboard toolbar that has the forward back buttons and a done button, that's a web view. That's not native, because that's a control you have to make yourself, and most developers are lazy. So users are smart, and they'll be able to tell that your app is not native. They'll be able to tell that your app is not, quite up to par with a lot of other ones. And I just really like this quote from Mark Zuckerberg. Betting on HTML5 was a mistake. Facebook for many years was a big proponent of HTML5 and cross-platform and all these really awesome things. And then I think it was 2012, they decided, nope, we're going native on everything. So you can do some really awesome stuff, and it's really easy to iterate. And HTML, JavaScript, CSS, those things, they're fantastic for prototyping. But if you want a really rich user experience, and if you want this app, and if you want to keep this code base around for many years to come, you probably don't want to be doing this, because the operating systems are not invested in it. Google has a bit better support for these kinds of things, but Apple, there's a version of WebKit that when you use it like a PhoneGap kind of app, the version of WebKit is not as good. So your app is actually going to be slower than if it was a web page running in Safari. So that also works with bookmarks too, although they might have fixed that in 7. So you're actually at a slightly disadvantage point of view in comparing it to like mobile web. So a lot of companies end up going iOS first. I'm an iOS developer, so obviously I'm like, yay, go iOS first. But it's really a question of who your users are and what they're going to be doing. WhatsApp is a great example. I think I saw a statistic that 80% of their users are on Android. That's because most of their users are outside of the United States. Android is much more popular globally than it is in the United States. So you usually end up thinking iOS first, Android first. I'm sorry, Windows 8. But it's not really even in the running most times. And it really ends up figuring out what's best for your users. On iOS, users generally buy more things. They're more engaged. People also have much higher standards. They don't expect apps to crash. They don't expect apps to do bad things with your data. I mean, I don't even have to mention like Path, and there was the WhatsApp thing, and there was the Tinder thing with all these security problems. So users trust more on iOS, and users end up buying more on iOS. But it really is what your user base is. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about infrastructure, because what a lot of companies don't realize is you're not just making an app. You're making a product team. You're making APIs for the first time so that apps can access the data that you need to display. So it's not just about, oh, we have an iOS code base now. That's not what it is at all, because things are going to break. Your app's going to get featured in the store, and then all of a sudden you have 500,000 new users, which actually does occasionally happen when you get that many downloads, and your server crashes. Like, you don't want that to happen. So your APIs are really important. I know this is becoming a big topic. I spoke a couple weeks ago at an API conference, and there's a couple other ones coming up that APIs are big and APIs are important because they're connecting all of these different pieces of the internet. And one of the best things and the worst things that you can hear when you're working at an agency is, but we have an API. It's usually not documented, it's usually built for some other purpose, and it always needs to be changed. So you're not just building an app, you're not just building this code base, you're building your entire internal infrastructure to support these things. And there are some really interesting things that happen with iOS and apps in general. So I'm gonna have a little story time and talk about app life cycles. So let's pretend I'm starting Super Startup Incorporated. We're awesome. And I'm a smart engineer. I'm, CEO, co-founder, technical person. So we're going to make an API first and release an iOS app. So this is great. I have my app out in the ecosystem. People are downloading it in the store. They're loving it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to make an Android app now because people have Android devices. I want to break into that market share. People have been asking for it. Great. Everybody loves it. Okay, I might as well have a website. People are saying, oh, your stuff is so useful. I want to use it everywhere. And then, just for funsies, I want to make a public API. I mean, if this, then that is awesome, and there's some really awesome third-party developer support and marketing you can get. So now, I have this one API. It's serving all of these different pieces, and we're going to fast forward 1 year. So we have an API. We have all these apps. iOS 8, some sort of Android thing gets released. And let's think about what is the current state of our apps? And the answer is people have old hardware. The thing about smartphones that people forget is that you're dealing with hardware. And there are all of these things you have to be careful of. When Apple released the iPhone 5S in September, developers were struggling because they changed the processor to 64-bit instead of 32. So all of our integer and float calculations now have to be handled in a different way to be compatible with both of those versions. And this also means every year there is a subset of users that will get left behind. Like iPhone 3GS does not support iOS 7. I'm not even going to the details about Android because everybody knows how hard it is to get updates because it's not controlled by Google, it's controlled by manufacturers. So there will be people trying to use your app who are still running Android 2.3 on their brand new phone. So this also means that those users are now stuck on a version of your app. The Google Play Store and the iOS Store, they do not allow you to update. Like if you drop support for iOS 6, which a lot of apps have done, you can't go back and upload a different app version just for iOS 6 users. You only ever upload one app. So if you're dropping support for iOS 6, you can never ever send an update to users who are using iOS 6. The idea is that they'll go away eventually, but in some places, especially education, where there's a lot of iPads and iPad 1s who are stuck on iOS 5, you have to be careful. So okay, we're still in the super startup, we're doing really cool, and we're gonna fast forward another year because we're super awesome, we're doing really great. And then there's some other new iOS version, new Android version, because these versions come out every year. And who knows, maybe there's some awesome new hologram technology that we really, really want to take advantage of because it's going to make our product so much better. So you're like, okay, let's rewrite everything from scratch. Believe it or not, you hear this a lot in mobile development because about 80% of our code bases tend to be UI. We're not doing a lot of heavy data lifting. We're pretty much just presenting information to the user and then passing it back to a server. Because if a user updates their phone, you don't want to have to rely on them actually transferring apps over. People don't really do that as much as you think they would. But my reaction to this is no, don't rewrite everything. There's a lot to be said for keeping new users. There's a lot to be said for future-proofing yourself when you start. There are some really easy things you can do with APIs, API versioning, plan deprecation, all sorts of things that you can do to help you move forward and not lose users. So mobile is all about thinking ahead because this is a very, very fast-paced world. As I said, WWDC and Google I/O are happening in June. We don't really know what's going to happen, but we can kind of tell that, they've been pushing some new technologies on us. So we can kind of think, oh, iOS is using this thing called auto layout now, maybe, and they've said that, it's going to be really big, so maybe I should pay attention to that. And to an iOS developer, that means more device screen sizes, which kind of sucks because I like only having two. So mobile's about thinking ahead. So we've covered product and making a minimum delightful product for users. We've covered the actual development and kind of what you need to get yourself started and jump started. So you can start tomorrow, right? Like this is all great. Like we can just go and do it, right? Just like any other product, a mobile app takes time, and you want to spend time on it. User testing is huge. There's also a huge community that uses all the accessibility features. So people who are, vision impaired, hearing impaired, they can use your apps. And they are absolutely some of the most amazing users you can get because they will love you if you make your app usable with some of the guided access stuff in iOS. Android is not quite as robust in that stuff. But you want to take your time and you want to be very specific in the decisions that you make. Mobile's also new challenges. People who are traditionally web technologists, they're like, we could do continuous deployment, we can do all of these really awesome things, we can just add in more servers when we need to. You can't do that on mobile. In the Android Google Play Store, you can pretty much update apps fairly frequently, but in Apple land, sometimes it takes 3 weeks. Sometimes it takes 2 days, but sometimes it takes 3 weeks. There are ways to get around that if you have like a hotfix crash, but in general, it's a much shorter cycle, and users are not always going to upgrade. There are some users who are really, really awesome about upgrading, but there's actually an article today, I forget who wrote it, on how ratings get reset in the App Store whenever you upload a new version. So if you're updating, I know the Venmo folks, they release a new version every 2 weeks. They lose their review stars every 2 weeks because that's the way the App Store works. So there's new challenges in terms of development, in terms of marketing, in terms of product, and new UX paradigms. A lot of companies want an app that just works like their website, but then you translate that and you have people use it and they're like, what is this thing? I just want to do this one thing that on the website I know is in this giant menu. So it takes more time, and people who are less familiar with the platforms, especially if you have a designer coming to mobile from web, you need to give time and make sure that you're making the right decisions. And testing is big on this. Like mobile developers love user testing. They love, love, love it. But mobile is also full of new opportunities because there's people, I see like a lot of people right now have a phone or a tablet out. And people carry these devices with them all the time. It is a huge opportunity to drive engagement, to drive sales, and to get people using your product. So it's just about being really specific and being really intentional about all of your decisions so that you can make something that is really and truly great and that users will rave about. Because nothing speaks better to a company's success than user success. So that's all I had for you tonight. Thank you.
I was wondering if you have any recommendations about in-app analytics and just general recommendations.
Analytics, that's a big one, and it's a big crowded space right now. If you're looking for a free product, Google Analytics is probably the best you're going to get. I've worked with Localytics, Flurry, and Kissmetrics, and all found them to be pretty good to work with. But a lot of companies already have an analytics provider when they go to make an app, so they usually base their decisions more on that.
Thank you for the talk. So you said reviews are reset with each version. Do you know the effect of that on category rankings or search ranking?
If I find the article that I saw earlier today, I'll tweet about it because it had that exact same metric where it does affect the rankings in the App Store when you upload a new version and you lose your reviews. It doesn't put you all the way down at the bottom, but you have to get a bunch more reviews in order to get back to that top slot if you already have it. So it's kind of a pro and a con about the App Store.
So if I want to write a sort of throwaway quick app, not what you're talking about, but for a party in a month, shortcuts?
There are a lot of online providers like Parse that'll do like backend as a service that will basically take care of all of your API integrations and all of your modeling. If you want to do something in about a month, it's just about keeping it simple. And I mean, that's the point where you might actually want to leverage some sort of the web technology, something like PhoneGap. I was talking to a woman at one of the Women Who Code meetups last night about Appery, APPERY.io, which is like an online HTML, CSS, JavaScript GUI builder thing that might also work out. But just keep it simple. You should be able to do something native in a month if you know Objective-C, but yeah, it's totally doable. Small apps, how small? But doesn't sound too different.
If I was going to be, I'm primarily a web guy, and I have some thoughts about potential web apps that might work for the place that I work. But if I were to be looking into experimenting, starting doing that process, do you have any recommendations on like where to start? I mean, obviously some of the things you mentioned, like PhoneGap, might be a thing to like do some like quick iteration and some ideas, but I want to get into more, potentially more developing something, places to start.
Yes. Probably if you're trying to, get your company to think more in the mobile realm, definitely pick what features you think would be really, really good on mobile. Like I worked on ModCloth's iOS app, and one of the things they really wanted was user reviews because, you have the app on your phone. You can just give it to like your mom and be like, hey mom, take a picture of me in this new dress. And then you can write the review right there. So it's kind of finding the features that really speak to mobile because most of the stuff will be able to translate pretty easily, and try starting with those at like a much simpler level. And then also doing some UX prototyping and just like, our app could be a little bit different than on the website and we might get more users to engage with this part. Also data and analytics. People use their phones for everything these days. So even if you don't have a mobile app, if you don't have a mobile website, chances are your analytics team can tell you how many people are still viewing your site from a mobile web browser, which will also... 40% mobile web, you probably want an app.
Yes. Sure, happy to. She's not a plant, I swear. So I'm the co-founder and CTO of 140 Proof, and we're a social data company that uses the interest graph, which is interest data around like who you're following or who you're connected to improve ad relevance. So we have an ads API. Our joke about you can't spell capitalism without API is a reference to app developers who use our API to monetize free apps. So the economics of the App Store are such that free apps generally will dominate paid apps because people like free things. And so if you have a free app, you don't have as many options to monetize. You can do in-app purchases where you're selling things. You can do ads. And so we believe that if you have relevant ads, you're actually going to come out ahead economically as an app developer. So that's what we focus on. Cool. Anything else? Any other questions? So feel free to sit around, grab some food, hang out, talk to smart people. And thank you all for coming. And thanks, Michelle. Thank you. Thanks.